Today's press briefing is titled Leadership in Bali, and we're going to be briefing on the issues around leadership at this COP. As you know, this year has been a pretty exciting year for those of us who are working on climate change in terms of the mounting pressure and urgency being placed on addressing climate change. With the UN climate panel, the IPCC fourth assessment report coming out with even more impressive science and clear science stating that we need to address climate change immediately. It's clear that the Bali negotiations are a place that real leadership needs to come in. So we have a great panel to discuss the leadership within the delegations. And also, we have an eco article that we've written this morning that goes into this as well. And you may have seen many of us in the Climate Action Network, as well as some other colleagues, wearing different lanyards from the standard UNFCCC lanyards. On these lanyards, we have a statement here that says, science, checkmark. As we know, the IPCC has really clarified the science, and it's clear the science of climate change and the needs for mitigation and adaptation. Next, it says statements, checkmark. There have been statements, the UN high level and otherwise, there have been statements from a variety of different leaders, as well as the public mounting pressure on this issue and addressing this issue. But the question, and where we have a question here, is action. When is action going to take place, and how is it going to take place? And it's clear that coming out of Bali, there needs to be a mandate for negotiations, accelerated negotiations, and so we need to negotiate now between 2007 and 2009. At the end of the press conference, I'll lay out some lanyards up on the front here, and so please do feel free to pick one up and wear it and show it around, because I think it provides a pretty important message here that we have seen the science, we've seen the statements and the public outcry, and really the question is, when is there going to be action, and who is going to take the leadership? So with that, I'll introduce our speakers today. First speaking, all the way at the end, is Meena Raman, who is the chair of Friends of the Earth International, and she'll be speaking to some of the work of the G77 group of countries. Our second speaker will be Arietta Motheta, who is Climate Change Advisor for Greenpeace Pacific. And finally, we'll have Matthias Duwe, who's Director of the Climate Action Network Europe. And we'll be speaking to the European leadership opportunities. So with that, I'll pass it on to Meena Raman, the chair of Friends of the Earth International.
Thank you and good morning. Just for the record, Friends of the Earth International is a network of 70 member groups, autonomous member groups around the world, and a large number of our member groups are located in the developing world. We have come together in Bali to actually represent the voices of a large member groups from the ground who work with local communities affected by climate change and who have been undergoing many stresses in many parts of the globe. Now, one of the things that we have also acknowledged is that we have in our own countries put a lot of pressure on our respective governments to ensure that climate change becomes a top priority. And we have also insisted that the policies that need to be undertaken are actually enormous. And in order to undertake a pathway, a stabilization pathway, a sustainable development pathway, to improve the living standards of our people, to alleviate poverty within an ecological framework that enables new policies for agriculture, industry, trade, and finance. Now, we know that this is a huge development challenge, as it is an environmental challenge. And we have also, in the last few days, been witnessing the kind of leadership that we are hoping to see our governments with. And we are encouraged, at least in the last few days, to note that many of our governments, the Africa Group, the G77 and China, have been making strong calls for very important ways in which to meet this onerous task at hand. particularly the area of technology transfer, for instance. In the last 2 days, technology transfer has become very high on the agenda of the negotiators. However, we are very discouraged and very disappointed that the leadership that they have advanced in asking for this issue to be given much more recognition is not being taken seriously enough, particularly by the United States and Japan, who are trying to scuttle the movement of this issue. Another aspect that we have seen, the Africa group in particular, along with the small island states, I'm sure my other colleague will also address that, the issue of adaptation and how finance for adaptation has to be a high priority for capacity building, which has to be a high priority. And we notice that even in these aspects, there is not enough recognition and acknowledgement of the work that needs to be done. In relation to emissions reductions, we note that at least with the convention and with the protocol, not much has been met at all. We know that the Kyoto Protocol obligations have not even been met. The technology transfer and finance aspects have not been met. The capacity building request has not been met. And given the historical responsibility of the North to do this, we are very, very upset that what is being seen here is to extract more concessions from the developing world so that the developed countries would do something more. So basically what we see is that the obligations which are already there in the convention and in the protocol are not being fulfilled. And instead of being fulfilled, in order for them to be fulfilled, more concessions are being demanded from the South. And what is really critical is also to note that the convention and the protocol very clearly say that the extent to which the developing countries meet their commitments and their obligations will depend upon the amount and extent of meeting of obligations by the North. So while we see leadership being expressed here by our governments upon our demand, and while they are talking about the implementation problems that they're having, we do not see the action that is needed by the North to take this very seriously. And in fact, we are we are skeptical. All the hype about climate change being top of the agenda, that we are serious, we want to do something. But by just witnessing the last 2 days, we do not see that leadership coming from the North. So how do you expect the South to show true leadership when the North is lacking in its leadership? And particularly, we are representing and hearing the voices of the poor on the streets. There are a lot of civil society organizations outside of this conference room demanding climate justice. And we are looking at our leaders and asking for more. But if we are really interested in protecting the poor and the most vulnerable around the world, then we really need to put action where the rhetoric is. And until that happens, we are very discouraged that the Bali talks will not move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meena. Next we have Arietta Mothesa, who is Climate Change Advisor for Greenpeace Pacific, and will be speaking about the Alliance of Small Island States.
Sorry, just as an intro, AOSIS is the Alliances of Small Island States, which is made up of some odd 80 small islands in the Pacific and in the Caribbean and Indian Ocean. I will speak specifically from the perspective of the small Pacific Island nations. Many of them are not more than 4 meters above the sea level. So you can imagine if the sea level rises 1 meter, you're talking about half of a nation going underwater. The smaller Pacific Island countries have historically been the least responsible for the impacts of climate change that we're seeing today, and the sciences have been so loud and clear that we will be the first to bear the brunt of the devastating impacts of climate change. As we speak, the Carteret Islanders are being relocated to mainland Papua New Guinea. Tuvalu has approached the governments of Australia and New Zealand to take its some odd 11,000 residents as environmental refugees. Kiribati is losing half of its nation to the king tides, which happens annually. For Fiji, there's loss of plantations. the encroachment of the seawater into the freshwater tables. Now, these things may not mean much to the big island, to the big nations, to the industrialized nations, but for them it would be, for us, it's an issue of food security, human security, statehood, nationhood. We do not wish to become second-class citizens in industrialized nations. We would like to maintain our statehood and nationhood. So as realpolitik continues, real people are behind the statistics. Real people are losing their livelihoods. Real people will become stateless. And so we applaud the leadership provided by our AOSIS leaders in the last 2 days in calling that Bali must be the place where scientific evidence is translated into real, bold action. Thank you.
Thank you, Arita. Finally, we have Matthias Duwe, who is Director of the Climate Action Network Europe, and will be speaking about the European aspects of leadership.
Thank you very much, Dave, and good morning to everyone. I also wanted to take a quick look again at the general expectations as also outlined by my two colleagues. I think we've heard a number of interesting statements in the various fora. They've had their opening plenaries and started their work here over the last 36 hours. And in particular, it's interesting to see how different the level of expectation seems to be, or how different parts and different actors are talking about the level of expectation here. From our process, from our perspective, excuse me, the fact that a lot of stakeholders seem to be focusing on the fact that in terms of the outcomes of these talks here in Bali, the main priority should be a process. And a process only with an end date is insufficient. A process, even if it is combined with a clear timetable, still needs substance if we want to be able to conclude a coherent agreement on the future of the international climate change regime within the next 2 years. So what are some of the elements that we believe should be part of that substance of the process? I think one of the overriding first items has to be the question, if we're talking about a roadmap from Bali that mandates negotiations, then the question is a roadmap to where? And that means, from our perspective, what is the level of ambition that the negotiations should be following in terms of the kind of agreement that they need to be concluding? And we believe that clearly there must be an indication of the global level of ambition, since the science is so clear on the need, for example, of a peak in global emissions within the next decade. Similarly, and referring back to comments made by my colleagues here, clearly we need to be more specific on the level of absolute emission reductions that the Annex I countries, that industrialized countries, have to be undertaking. And there has been some concrete language about this under the AWG session that we had in Vienna just a couple of months. There was a clear reference to the IPCC third working group report that says 25 to 40% reductions is at least what's needed as a range for industrialized country absolute emission reductions as a group. And this kind of language needs to be put on the table here again as a kind of substance in terms of the roadmap to where this is heading, has to be included in the decisions, and that has to be something that not only is part of the Kyoto track, where existing Kyoto ratifiers are talking about deeper emission reductions, but we also have to have this kind of demand put on the table for those developed countries that have so far chosen not to ratify the Kyoto Protocol, namely the United States. And so this level of ambition for range of 25 to 40% reductions also has to be coming under the discussions taking place under the convention. And this is something, this range is being supported in statements by AOSIS, in fact by a statement from China, by the European Union. And I think it is time, and echoing the call for clarity on more action from developed countries, to ask what is the stance on this range from Australia in particular, from Canada, for example, and from Japan. and also to put this demand before the United States. There is clearly, I think, and that's what Meena was referring to in terms of the leadership being shown by the G77 countries. There's an olive branch being extended here by major developing countries in terms of them expressing the recognition that or the willingness for them to start talking about greater contributions from their side. But clearly, this is an offer of something that is quid pro quo. Only if the historical polluters, the rich nations of the world, are stepping up to the plate and to their responsibility on the kind of deeper emission reductions that they'll need, will there be any willingness of G77 countries to start contributing more. Other key parts of the substance must be to have down some key elements of substance that have to be discussed in the next 2 years, including obviously those deeper emission reductions and the greater contributions driven by incentives that have to be coming on the table in the form of financial and technological assistance, in the form of mechanisms that can help facilitate this kind of sustainable development that meets developing country requirements. And then, as part of that, the technology item that was being referred to needs a very specific treatment over the next 2 years. And obviously all of this cannot go without talking about how to help avoid or adapt to the inevitable changes that we'll be seeing. So financing and assistance on adaptation to the most vulnerable countries and communities has to be very specifically on the agenda. And then one third item on the substance that we believe is to be key is that it has to be clear that this process leads to the adoption of a legally binding instrument. And that is not part of some of the discussions, some of the declarations here, and we think that is an absolutely fundamental point, is that this regime in the long term will only have the integrity and the force that it needs if it's clear that it's leading to a legally binding instrument, such as the Kyoto Protocol is. Then just a few additional words on the European Union. We believe that the EU, while it's coming up with a lot of the right kind of language in their statement so far, it needs to clearly firm up its leadership in insisting very clearly and coming out in force on the range for deeper emission reductions for Annex 1 countries, not only under the AWG, but also under the Convention, to include the current non-ratifiers under the Kyoto Protocol, and needs to be asking for the substance very strongly to be included in the negotiation process. It needs to be showing leadership by engaging, or on a positive note, with the major developing countries that are basically stretching out their hand and saying we are willing to cooperate. And I think the EU has also to play an important role in demanding clarity from its fellow developed countries on where they stand in terms of the earnesty of their declarations that climate change is an important issue for them. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Mike Casey with the Associated Press. Question for any of the panelists. I guess, we've heard some different positions come out, and Duwe has kind of tried to play that down and say, let's not get ahead of ourselves, let's focus on agreeing negotiations and a timetable. What do you think about that fear that, talking about, trying to get all these targets and very specifics into the roadmap could actually derail everything?
Matthias,
I'm afraid I'll have to reiterate my points in that respect, that we believe just having the process in and by itself, even with the end date, which is also crucial to make sure that there is a deadline, basically, that will force countries to come to an agreement, that if we start from here without giving a sense of where the journey is going, that will be insufficient. And as I said, there is existing language that on global ambition levels, even if it is not as clear and as specific as we think it has to be, and that was part of the AWG decisions in Nairobi 1 year ago, and at the meeting in August/September in Vienna, there was clear reference to the guidance from the IPCC, which is, after all, the internationally recognized body on the latest state of the science on climate change, And the modelings that have been assessed by the IPCC state that a range of 25 to 40% emission reductions will clearly be necessary by the year 2020 by developed countries. And this was part of the decision in Vienna, and we believe that there is otherwise no reason not to be taking these numbers up again and have them both as a clear level of ambition for where the negotiations are heading under the AWG and under the convention. This is also the kind of signal that I think the developing countries have a right to be clear about what kind of level of absolute emission reduction commitments the Annex I countries are aiming at.
Meena, would you like to respond to that?
No, I just wanted to say that the issue of the targets, I think what is really at stake here is not so much the science of it. I think every grouping has alluded to the science. Everybody has said that the science has suggested this. I think what has to happen here is how do we make the science a reality in a way of concrete moving of the issues that are fundamental. And from the developing countries, I think what they see is it's very difficult to come to any kind of an operationalizing of any target if the technology is not there, if the finance is not there, if the capacity building issues, which are so basic, like tools for, we were hearing in the room yesterday, observation tools, as basic as that. If these very basic aspects, which have been there in the convention and in the protocol for the last few years, in the convention for the last 13 years, the technology issues is not new. It has been there. We've heard our negotiators from the G77 saying this has had such a low priority. So if you really are asking for the operationalizing of the way forward, it would have to come from a real meeting of the technology bit, of the finance bit. Unless and until this is very, very firm, you're not going to see any movement further. But how on earth is the developing world going to undertake a low-carbon economy without the enormous finance and adaptation and mitigation pathway that is absolutely necessary?
Can I just say that with all this, can we not forget the human element? That there are real human lives here? That industrialized nations have a moral and ethical obligation to ensure these negotiations start, to have something binding by 2009, to put human rights perspective back into the negotiations, human rights over the economic selfish interests of a few industries. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We'll go with the gentleman here in the front.
Yeah, can I go back to that first question?
Can you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry, David Stephen, Open Democracy. Can I go back to that first question? We understand your position on wanting specifics, but we've had Mr. Duwe here a couple of times saying that he thinks specifics could well be a distraction. When you've got somebody in his position giving those signals, what is your view on that? Could you comment specifically on that? And secondly, could you give us some more specifics on India and China's position? You said that you think that some of the major developing countries are being very helpful, but could you give us a greater understanding of what they're saying, and as you said, what they are putting on the table? Thank you.
Yes, I think this would be for Ms. Raman. I wonder, you had mentioned, Pete Spots with the Christian Science Monitor. You had mentioned that on this on the technology side of things, that the developed countries are trying to use that to extract more concessions from developing countries. And I wonder if you might have a specific example or two of that that would illustrate that point.
Hi, Mike Feinstein, Green Pages, the newspaper of the Green Party of the United States. You talked about legally binding frameworks for this next round. What do you envision for that sort of framework, and how much further than what existed in Kyoto, and why?
I think one of the phrases that Mr. Duwe used as a metaphor was that we are on a first date here. And I think from our perspective, these parties have been dating for over 15 years now. And I think we're definitely beyond the first date in that respect. In terms of the alluding to potential impact on the dynamics of the negotiations here, we believe that there has to be, this is basically focusing mainly on, I think, the reluctance by a number of developed countries, in particular at the moment. Australia not being clear about whether it supports this range, and definitely also, I'm not entirely sure about Japan, definitely not the US at this point, that an indication that this range is being accepted by Annex I countries as what they need to be shooting for is clearly required by the developing countries as a sign, as a clear commitment to the deeper reductions and taking on their responsibility as historical polluters that have created the problem. So in terms of the dynamics, I think my argument would be that indeed it's actually something that can build the necessary trust, and that is necessary for developing countries to see as a signal for them to be, realizing the offer that they are making in statements, in the negotiations. I think in the last 2 days we heard definitely Brazil and South Africa saying that they're willing to talk about additional contributions. But that is part of a balanced deal. It's quid pro quo. If Annex I countries are not willing to say where they're heading in terms of their deeper emission reductions, then you're not going to get the developing countries to agree to starting negotiations on what is going to be their fair share. So, yeah, that would be my reply.
Meena, I believe there was a question urgent as well.
No, I do think that what Mr. Duwe is saying has there's some truth in what he says, because I think what is really critical is confidence building. Just to build on what Matthias has been saying, because if you're expecting the developing countries to do more, then the confidence building exercise is absolutely critical. If the history if the record shows that the obligations so far have not been fulfilled by the Annex I, which is a legally binding obligation which exists under legally binding agreements now, how can you expect more from developing countries? So I think this, in the last 2 days, this has been the essence of the test, in the acknowledgement that the sincerity and the urgency that is needed and the goodwill that is needed from the North is not forthcoming. And I think that to put the targets on the table right now is really going in the wrong direction. So the building blocks of the confidence building exercise and the trust that needs to be built has to be rebuilt, because we saw that in the last 2 days. And for those of you who want to know the details of that, because I was here in the convention hall since last night, beginning with the discussion on the movement, just the movement of the technology transfer issue. It's called the development and technology transfer issue, which was being dealt with by the scientific body, the SubStar. The G77 wanted that discussed and to be discussed as well in the implementation body, because that's where the implementation of the convention will take place. If you discuss technology there, it will move forward if there is the finance and if there is a decision that would make it happen in the sense of the implementation of it, not the scientific aspects, but the implementation. But there was a huge reluctance to even have a contact group discuss what the scope of that would be. And it was just mind-boggling for those of us who sat in that room last night, let alone our negotiators. If technology is a key piece of this building confidence, why is there a reluctance to form a contact group? And in fact, the chair even said, or not the chair, even somebody from the Africa group said, doesn't matter. Even if you go to the contact group and say that we don't want to move forward, that alone is what's needed. So the point we're making is that, every agenda item on the agenda goes into a contact group to flesh out the kinds of decisions that ministers have to make. that was being stopped. So how on earth can you talk about targets when you don't even want to engage on what the scope and the depth and the needs on technology? And the scientific body has been talking, they have an expert group on technology transfer. They have been talking for the last 2 years, and they have exhausted all the talk. The issue now is how do you walk the talk? And that's not happening. Now, in relation to the India-China issue, I do not represent either of these governments. And all I would say is that from what we see, I think China was actually very, very forceful in their presentation on the tech transfer issue, and India too, and even South Africa was very strident on the technology issue. And they are all saying the same thing, that if you want us to move forward, then these are the things that need to happen on technology. So they have done a technology needs assessment. Enough of talking about the needs assessment. Now is how do you ensure that the technology really happens? What are the barriers there to technology transfer? How can we remove those barriers? This is also the intellectual property rights debate. So these are very important issues. And if you want to unlock the technology so that the low carbon pathway can go on, this is a key piece. And if there is reluctance, then you can forget about talking about any targets. So the India-China leadership, I think there is really a fear. There is a real fear that the North is not really serious about all this. And if you look at the Japanese proposal in particular, they're calling for a scrapping of the Kyoto Protocol. And what does this mean? Because the Kyoto Protocol is obligations for the Annex 1. If you hear about scrapping the Kyoto Protocol, it means that you want the developing countries to take on binding targets. Now, if you are a developing country with huge problems, and there is the issue of technology, there's the issue of finance, there is the problem of resources and poverty and all these other issues, of course you're going to be fearful of what this means. And why on earth do you want to scrap the Kyoto Protocol that has been negotiated with so much of difficulties? So I think the fear is real, and when I talk about the extraction of the concession, that's what we mean. We mean that even if and there's been a spin which is going on, and we don't know who's been spinning this, that the Kyoto Protocol is expiring. The Kyoto Protocol is not expiring. The second commitment period is expiring. And why is it being spun as if the Kyoto Protocol is dead or is dying? And this is what, the only reason why people want to kill the Kyoto Protocol is to get the non-Annex 1 on board. And that is the hidden agenda as we see it. So,
thank you.
So I think that these myths have to be dispelled.
Thanks, Meena. I think we have just time for Matthias to respond real quickly, and then I apologize, we'll have to wrap it up.
I think that was a sort of good connection with me replying also to the question from the representative of Green Pages. I would echo Meena in the sense that in terms of the need for a legally binding instrument, what we are saying is that we need to be continuing the Kyoto Protocol and its architecture. But we don't necessarily want to be precluding how, what is this going to be called necessarily, or, if in terms of an expansion of sorts or adding elements, what the legal nature of this is going to be. But the fundamental is that it has to be legally binding, because otherwise, the many provisions in it, etc., will, not be enforceable.
Thank you, Matthias, and thank you to all of our speakers. Just a reminder, we'll be having our daily Fossil of the Day award announcement at 6 o'clock towards the back of the first floor of the conference center here. That is an award that highlights some of the less than productive actions of country delegations. And just to reiterate, the Climate Action Network is a worldwide network of over 430 non-governmental organizations, and we all are working together to try to find some appropriate solutions to the climate change problem. So,
one of the last
elements left that hasn't realized that climate change is real and needs decisive political action. And for them to be blocking progress
On targets,
yes.
I mean, they're talking about 25 to 40% target in 2020. That's a 1990 baseline.
Yes.
So for the US, that's already 16% over the 1990 baseline. That's 40 to 55% in a 12-year
from current levels.
12-year period. Do you think that's in any way realistic?
I think what the range is being talked about is a range for the group as a whole. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the range for all individual countries. But I think what is necessary to develop criteria for the share among the countries that are part of that group. And that would have to take into account things like, financial and technical capacity, also historical emission levels, and other criteria. And so what the individual country targets under such criteria would look like, I can comment on for you.
So the longer the US stays out, the less of a target it's likely to have to take on?
The US historical emissions are not going to change if the US doesn't start doing something about them, the current levels. And I would say, on the contrary, in terms of the responsibility for climate change, every additional 100 millions of tons emitted into the atmosphere will just increase the responsibility for the problem, and therefore the need for the United States to act. It still is, I think, at this point, the world's largest emitter as a single country, and I think it is a slap in the face of the rest of the world that it is not deciding to proactively and constructively engage with a clear view to having to take on absolute emission reduction targets.
Just one more. You were pretty clear that China and India, other countries, have put out an olive branch, I think.
I didn't mention India, I think.
Okay. Okay. Well, tell me about China and tell me about India, just specifically on the olive branch, and then maybe about where India is at the moment.
Well, I cannot comment at this point specifically on India, but I've heard that the Chinese have very constructive interventions. They may be preparing some more specifics on this. I think there are certainly discussions on the recognition of the need to offer more substantive contributions within the G77, and over the course of the last year even, I'm not just talking, this is a process that's been going on, a discussion that's been going on for a while. Starting in terms of the negotiations in May in Bonn, have major developing countries, specifically Brazil and South Africa, also come forward and said, we realize we need to move away from just talking about what we need to be doing to negotiating what our fair share is and contributing to the solution. And I think China is on board for that as well, and I think that is starting to get somewhere where there's a critical mass within the G77 that is clearly showing to the rest of its negotiating partners, we're willing to have a proper discussion about it. But they will need the assurance that the other side will deliver in taking on its responsibility for the historical build-up of emissions in the atmosphere, and that will have to mean significantly deeper emission reductions than agreed previously for the first commitment period.
Thank you.
On the technology, is the criticism directed to all the industrial companies or?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Technology. They are not.
It was very clear yesterday. This is here. Yeah? This is the Turkish network
haven't
thing.
been attending that
It gives you all the
specific forum,
details.
so
Japan proposed this, yeah, and then they wanted all this added, and then Canada supported Japan's proposal. Yeah, you have this. This is the divisive start to the Bali talks, not presses when you agree with it.
Japan don't want the technology transfer to the other countries.
That's the least of your problem. Japan was resisting a contact group. Yeah, not even a contact group, but they don't want even the Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto Protocol is the only protocol. This was in Japan, by the way. Kyoto is in Japan. They want to dump
Meena, where's your colleague Martin with the report that you just mentioned?
He is in the plenary of
In the plenary?
He's in the plenary room.
What's his name? Martin what?
Martin Khor, Khor. If you want, I can arrange for you to meet all of them.
Yep.
Immediately.
I would like
That'd be cool.
Is it possible?
It's pretty famous.
Where's Gita? Where's Gita?
Okay.
Can I have one? If you give me a few minutes, I will take you there.
Okay. Boleh saya minta ini?
Be able to start shouldering part of the responsibilities
Thanks.
they start controlling everything as well.
The United States. The EU said, yeah, we don't mind a contact group, but let's see, it has to be flexible. It has to be much more friendly. We don't know what they meant, because a contact group is a contact group. It's not a coffee shop. Yeah.
But
So it's like still expressing some kind of discomfort.
Right, but beyond this issue of the contact group on the whole, do you think that they are just dragging their feet as the Europeans as much as Japan, US?
They're not as bad as Japan or US. Let me put it that way. Japan, US, and Canada. Yeah, they're not as bad as that. Yeah, but I don't want to say anything beyond that.
Right, okay.
isn't it strange? Isn't it strange that you think at least the northern countries want to promote more business? So at least, even if they don't want targets for everything else, at least technology transfer would be business. Why are they even against that?
Now that's really a very important issue, because it's not, you see, when the South talks about technology transfer, they're talking about preferential access, or they're talking about concessional terms. They are talking about obtaining it cheaply, because the issue is one of access to technologies. It's not just about the technology coming, and the poor who need it the most and require it the most will not be able to pay. If there is a patent on it, for example. And so I think that is a real issue. If the technology is owned by the companies in the north, the issue is how will it be made easily accessible to the south.
So it's a threat.
So you need funding. You would need, because northern governments, if they are serious, they'll probably need to provide some kind of financial arrangements to make sure that the south can obtain it make it accessible to the poor and those who need it the most. Because you have the adaptation technologies and also you have the mitigation technologies. So, and then of course you have the intellectual property rights issue. So it is. You see, it's business for us. Yeah, but not help for you.
So why are you so concerned about contact group is not happening? Why are you so concerned about it?
Because how do you move this agenda forward? You see, the way it works, the way the subsidiary bodies work, if you want a decision to be taken, because when the ministers will come for the high-level segment, certain decisions have to be on the table. For the decisions to be on the table, usually they have a smaller group to discuss, and they say, on the issue of development and technology transfer, we want the following address. That will come as a decision.
Right. Okay? So this negotiation will not happen when contact groups don't happen.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
That's possible.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Clarify something. There was a willingness to discuss. I watched that extraordinary process.
Wasn't it extraordinary?
Very odd. And very interesting, because it made every journalist know, only two in the room, but we really picked up our ears what was going on, because they wanted anything except to have it out there. They would talk to you behind closed doors. It wasn't that they wouldn't talk to you, but they would only do so behind closed doors. So they don't want it out there. What is it just? What is this? What are these specific technology transfers? The main ones. I mean, is it just the money, the property rights, or is it just the intellectual property rights, or is it?
It's also finance. No, it's also finance. I mean,
it's about money. It's mainly about money.
You see, if you treat it as a very important, the convention already says that the North has to ensure technology transfer.
Can I just add in here that Arnold Watson actually specifically said at the meeting, I heard Arnold Watson say
that's the US guy.
Yeah, he said twice, we will not agree to fund for technology transfer. He specifically said it twice to a bingo.
Can it be public?
Well, I shouldn't have been there, but I'm telling you.
So how on earth
So
you
he
expect?
specifically, yes, exactly.
How
So
do you expect Africa to have any kind of, let's say, clean energy? Yeah? How? Without any money.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, I'm drum close to art. I agree.
You shouldn't. See, that's what's frightening about this whole thing.
So what Matthias is saying is that it's a deliberate attempt to abort the process, because if it's not caps, now it's technology transfer.
You can interpret it in 100 ways. They're not interested.
How would you interpret it?
Well, I wouldn't see. I think it's a bargaining chip to get China, India on board. That basically, for me, is the big picture. They have always been saying it. The major emitters, the industrializing countries. Who are they targeting? They are targeting the China and India, but they don't see the per capita or the India is not, with 600 million people or 800 million people, it's not the Bangalore India, it's the millions of poor.
Right.
Yeah. Same with China, it's not just because the GNP is booming, there's a huge amount of poverty in that country as well. So the question is, they want to get them on board in terms of absolute emission cuts. So this is the way to do it, because China has been talking about a fund. China wants a fund for technology.
Right.
I mean, it's been proposing that a multilateral fund is set up so that developing countries can access technology. So the US is actually horse trading.
Yes. Okay. So the horse trade.
If
So
you
there
want
is
to,
hope.
I don't know. I really don't know. I really don't know.
if you wanted to be cynical, you could say the U.S. isn't doing it for environmental reasons. If you wanted to be cynical, you could say the U.S. isn't doing it for environmental reasons as much as trying to make it from an economic competitive argument to try and put more restrictions on.
It is purely interested in its own economic interest and its business interest.
Yeah. Nothing new. Thank you.